I remember a very specific time in high school when I began to think about life a little differently, and I began to realize the power of the written word and the spoken word. And it was these lines that kind of changed the way I was thinking. It said, 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled. And that has made all the difference. I was in a literature class, and we were reading poetry, and we got to the road not taken that begins 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and I heard those opening lines. And for the first time, I began to really see imagery for the first time take shape and call me to this journey, and it motivated me, which worried me because that caused me to engage in what was going on at school. And then I was like, oh, now I might learn something. And so fear took over, and panic, and then excitement. Because 2 roads diverged, and this man took the one less traveled. And whatever it meant, it made all the difference, and that excited me. I began to think about the opportunities that life brings at you, these forks stuck in the road, and you get to them, and you got to choose. And, of course, he tells the story of going down one as far as he could and putting a mark there, and then going back and knowing he'd never actually head down that trail again. But choices that we make, these whys, and we make a decision that changes everything. And I began to think about the significance of that. What if right now in this class I listen, I engage in this word, I engage in something right now, causes one of those forks to appear in my life, and the path I was on is no more, and this new path occurs before me. And I began to think about the power of the journey I was on. I wouldn't have been able to tell you this. I was a 16-year-old high school guy, and I wouldn't have told you I was thinking these things either. I would have said, fine. That's how 16-year-olds respond to how life is going for them, fine. But I was beginning to think about this, the difference that was made in that point. And then it was a little bit later until college when I came to one of those other turning points. And this time it was a very dramatic imagery. It wasn't this yellow wood with these 2 trails, one well-worn and the other not so worn, but there were gates. And there was a narrow gate, and there was a broad gate. And when I began to get confronted with the opportunities there, I realized that as I stopped to consider these gates, people were brushing past me as if there's all these people traveling. And the broad gate was actually, it was so well traveled that the gate was held open by the number of people flowing through it. And there was a part of me that wants to be in. There was a part of me that doesn't want to go against the norms, that thought, well, everyone seems to be going that direction. Yet there was this narrow gate, and it appeared there were few who were finding it. And it's almost as if it were locked, and you had to knock and stand at it, and someone would receive you in. And I remember being confronted with the claims of Jesus Christ, who in fact is the gate. And I remember making the decision, another one of these decision points in life where I took the narrow gate. I took the one less traveled. And I realized once I entered through it, I never chose that gate at all. That was the path that I was led on. That was the path I was entering into. And it was at that point that I was struck with the power of the journey, and I began to be struck with the power of imagery. Now, in high school, I was struck with the power of imagery and this picture of the journey we are on, and the picture that I was being given through literature. And I thought, there is power in words that change lives. And that's when I decided I'll be a lit major. I'll go into literature, and then I'll start teaching literature. The other thing that attracted me to that is it differed from mathematics. In mathematics, there was a right and a wrong answer, and the teacher needed to know the difference. But in literature, most of the authors weren't alive, so who's to say, I believe what the author was saying was this. And I thought, let's go with a more ambiguous future. And so I went that path. But of course, Christ entered in during college and changed all that. Entering through the narrow gate is the way I went, because that one is the one that leads to life. And as we enter this series on the Proverbs, if you haven't turned there, go ahead and turn to chapter 1. Proverbs talks about the fact that we're all on a journey, and that's really the book of Proverbs is the best way for us to picture that as we preach through this as a team, is you're picturing this journey that Proverbs is painting out for us. In fact, look at chapter 2, verse 20. It says, so you will walk in the way of good men and keep to the paths of the righteous. For the upright will live in the land, and the blameless will remain in it. But the wicked will be cut off, and the treacherous will be uprooted from it. Wonderful imagery about this, the walk of the way of good men and these paths of righteousness and this journey that's laid out before each of us that causes us to choose. Look at chapter 4, verse 25. Let your eyes look directly ahead, and let your gaze be fixed straight in front of you. Watch the path of your feet, and all your ways will be established. Do not turn to the right nor to the left. Turn your foot from evil. And so Proverbs is painting this picture of the journey that we all are on. And everyone can relate to the fact that life is a journey made up of these decision points where we decide which roads to take. And Proverbs enter in and said, yes, there is a road. And there's a road that Proverbs calls us to, but it's a straight path. It calls us to not swerve off course to the right or to the left. And in fact, verse 11 of chapter 4 says, I've directed you in the way of wisdom. I've led you in upright paths. When you walk, your steps will not be impeded. And if you run, you will not stumble. And so this path that's being laid out, that section shows us that there is a straight path of righteousness. And then as he begins to unfold it, there's the way of evil men, the paths of the wicked. And Proverbs shows us how to keep to the paths of the righteous while avoiding the paths of the wicked. And he paints that picture in many ways. And it's wonderful how this journey begins to unfold. And he contrasts it. So we're called to this journey. You can get a picture of Proverbs as a journey as we head down this straight path and not turning from it. And what the book calls us to is to not spend too long. Don't veer off of this journey and spend too long in the inn of sloths where you begin to waste away your time. And it calls us, don't stop and fight with the men of quarrel. And you can almost see them over here. That looks pretty good. Fight Club. I'll stop and join that. And don't run off the trail into the wilderness to join some band of fools who are starting a band, whatever the case may be. And don't spend our times too long in a pub hanging out with drunkards. Stay on the path. And don't veer off to the left to hide behind the rocks with the other evil men who are waiting there to ambush the rest of the people on the journey. Proverbs instructs us on life and how to make the right decisions that impact our journey and our path. So it's basically an instruction manual on living wisely and living shrewdly. How do I use a credit card? How do I use credit? Do I use credit? Do I avoid credit? What does credit cause? It answers the question. Who should I marry? Is there value in hard work? What about parenting? How do I parent? What about friendship? How do I engage in friends? What are friends for? How do I work with friends? What about vocation? What about sex? What about alcohol? How, when, and what do I speak? How do I deal with those in authority? Proverbs has all of it, and it all unfolds before us. Now, what we'll look at tonight, if you can head back to chapter 1, is that the theme of Proverbs will quickly unfold. When you call a series Proverbs the book of wisdom, you kind of give it away in your title a little bit, as wisdom becomes the theme of the book. It's very hard to read much of the text without running into wisdom. And what we'll find in Proverbs, and we'll even see it tonight, is that wisdom is presented as both a human task, which is something for us to apply to our lives, and also a divine gift, something God imparts to us. And you see the two laid out before us as we head through the book together. And when you think about this journey that we're on, it's an interesting one for us to consider. How do we even present it? So that's why I took the introduction, because it's very clear, verses 1 through 7. I have no idea how the other guys are going to tackle the rest of the book, but I'm as excited as you are to see what they'll do. But if you read through the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 1 through 9 unfold together in some very large chunks. And so this journey is mapped out very clearly as we begin our journey. And then you get into a section where it appears there's just random wisdom on living that appears at different points. But if you think about the journey context, and we'll unfold this as we walk through the book together, as you're walking on the journey, the best way to think about the subjects that I even talked about is that you will run into these subjects that are orbiting around us as we go through the journey. which means there is much that has to do with our speech and with our tongue and the things that we say, the things we shouldn't say, when to say them, what not to say. The fact that a fool, when he keeps silent, even appears wise, which is one people keep reading to me. And so at this point, I'd like to just close in prayer. And I would like to, but I'm called to keep going. And as you think about speech, what we'll find as we walk through the book is that the topic of speech will orbit around us, and we'll keep picking up different aspects of it. The same is true of sexuality, the adulteress, commitment in marriage, and that area, the use of alcohol. All those things will keep orbiting around us, and we'll intersect with them. And so as we take this journey that God calls us to, this straight path that he leads us on, he contrasts the wise man and the fool. And so we'll walk down that. To make sure you know what the wise path looks like, he'll often talk about the path that the fool is on and how that is in contrast to the wise man. So when you think about these subjects, what we'll end up doing is talking about them as a whole, which will lead us to different portions of the book. But tonight we look at the introduction, which just lays out before us. It's what we read in the beginning. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. So the beginning point, at least, we're very clear who the author is. The man who asked for wisdom from God and was given divine wisdom. So we understand that a wise man has written this book. And he simply says this. Here's our purpose. He gives it straightforward. To know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding. So wisdom, to know wisdom, you'll see it signified in the book of Proverbs as skillful living is a great way to think about wisdom. The ability to make wise choices and live successfully according to God's standards. And so that is the wisdom that begins to unfold, skillful living. And then instruction, not only do you need skillful living, but you need instruction, because all of us need to be corrected, because there seems to be within us some natural inclination to get off course. We just keep veering. And it's called a sin nature. And we end up in the way of the fool so quickly when we make unwise decisions with the decisions and those forks that the world and life brings at us. So skillful living and the ability to correct us when we're off, to know wisdom and instruction. So we understand that what we'll read as we head through Proverbs is an instruction manual on wise living, skillful living, the way that we can operate and live life and navigate through the minefields of decisions that can lead us to end up in the path of the fool, and correction when we end up there. And then verse 3, to receive instruction in wise behavior. So the same thing there, to correct us, not just to correct us when we're wrong, but to show us the wise path, that straight path that God wants to lead us on. Righteousness, justice, and equity. Now it's interesting because these are moral terms, and it's very easy to take Proverbs. In fact, you can take Proverbs out of context and just pull one or two, and it's hard to even know that's in the Bible due to the fact it simply seems to address wise living and the skill that we need to operate. And so Proverbs will often describe the way life actually is and the way things often operate and the way that we can navigate through life together. But it's not simply instruction on wise living. There is a moral aspect to the book of Proverbs: righteousness, justice, and equity. So it's not simply a collection of sayings. You can't just say, well, the ancient Egyptians also had their Proverbs for wise living. We have the Farmer's Almanac for the Proverbs for wise living, and the ancient Hebrews had the book of Proverbs. Because it's not simply these sayings that help us stay straight and narrow path that all of us can apply, but Proverbs wants us to know how the world works, but it also demands that in order to really and truly live skillfully, we must be infused by God in order to live righteously and not corruptly. Because our corrupt decision-making based on our sinful nature is what will lead us into the path of the fool every time. And so the moral aspect that God brings into this is to not just receiving instruction. It's not that we're donkeys on a path that need to be constantly whipped in order to keep going and beaten in order to stay straight. It's that there is a moral infusement that needs to happen for us to even live righteously, for us to embrace justice, and for us to understand equity. And we'll unfold what that looks like as we move forward. But verse 4, it says to give prudence to the naive and to the youth knowledge and discretion. So it's interesting because one of the things that we'll see, one of the themes, if you have the wise person, you have the fool, you have the simpleton, the simple man, the naive one. This will be another theme that comes up. And to give prudence to the naive, to the youth, knowledge and discretion. So another great purpose here is for prudence, knowledge, and discretion. Prudence and discretion are good for everyone. It's universal. And there's nothing specifically even religious about those terms given in the way that righteousness, justice, and equity were there. In fact, prudence is used to describe the serpent in Genesis 1. It's the same word talking about how cunning he is. So it's morally neutral. But in the same way, it describes a cleverness that we need in order to navigate life. There is a cleverness required in order to operate through life. It's naive to think that you just move forward and let life happen to us, and somehow success will result from that. That's what the book of Proverbs is pointing out. So prudence, this cleverness that we need to apply to our life. And then discretion. That word is also used, and we could use several negative illustrations for how that word is used because it's a plotting or a cunning that oftentimes deceptive people will use in order to fool others. The positive way to take that is street smarts. Street savvy is the idea there of discretion. How to get a good deal. A person who has discretion knows how to get a good deal. They know how to navigate. They don't simply walk in and receive life to them. This person actually has free checking. No fees. There's nothing just accumulating. This person isn't still leasing their phone from whoever, Ma Bell, they're not getting charged a monthly fee for the rental of their telephone. This person didn't pay a lot for their car insurance. This person is street savvy. They don't need to taste wine while they're picking up their groceries. Winco will do. They simply go and buy what they need. They live at home, and they work a job, and they take community college classes for their first 2 years of college, knowing that going into massive debt doesn't seem to equal a future career. They make wise decisions. They have street smarts, and they devise ways to maximize their resources and their opportunities. There's a cunningness that goes with it. They're inventive, and they're resourceful. That's what Proverbs is calling us to be, giving prudence to the naive and to the youth knowledge and discretion. It would be wonderful if those were things that you just infused. You ordered them, you took your children to the doctor. We're going to need flu shots and maybe knowledge and maybe 2 things of discretion. And so that's just infused in and off we go. We all know that's not the case, but what Proverbs tells us is that God's actually in the business of that. The infusement of prudence, the infusement of wisdom, the infusement of knowledge and discretion that leave us to live life skillfully, to make wise decisions. And Proverbs unveils how we can live with street smarts, how we can have the savvy to move through life. So basically, how can we live life in a wise and cunning fashion that enables each of us to thrive on this journey that God calls us to? That is a strong selling point to get into the book of Proverbs. When you think about making wise decisions and moving forward with the skill set that the God of the universe, who created all things, who understands exactly how all things work together and how all things come together, has now given a very specific manual on how to navigate this fallen condition that we find ourselves in and how to skillfully navigate through it in a way that brings him glory and brings us his good. And then verse 5 is a humbling encouragement to us all, because a wise man will hear and read Proverbs and increase in learning. And a man of understanding, again, we're not talking about youth, we're not talking about a fool, we're not talking about someone who's naive, we're talking about a wise man and a man of understanding. They will increase in learning and acquire wise counsel. The wonderful thing that the Bible, every page you open to, will constantly tell us is that you have not arrived. We have not arrived. You don't get to the point where you are living skillfully, you have made it, and you don't really need God or his instructions anymore. And you kind of just throw it out. But we never arrive. Every wise man will actually turn back to his word and will increase in learning. The other wonderful thing this tells us about Proverbs, you can never get to the bottom of it. You can keep mining. This is true of every portions of God's word. We can keep mining it for gold and go to the depths of it where the gems keep coming forward, where wise learning, increasing in learning and acquiring wise counsel are constantly there to be had. So it's this beautiful picture of what we have within the book for us. And then verse 6 is to simply help us to understand these proverbs and the figures, the words of the wise, and their riddles. And verse 7 is the key to unlocking the whole book. You take the key, the most significant one, verse 7, here it is. Because if you're going to talk about wisdom and you're going to talk about knowledge, it's always good to start in the beginning. And verse 7 tells us the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And it contrasts that with fools who despise wisdom and instruction. So the great purpose statement of the book of Proverbs, the fear of the Lord. It's a common word for fear right here in the Old Testament. It has a basic, you can say it has a threefold meaning, because it's kind of one of those words, it's difficult to translate the full picture of what we're trying to talk about when we say the fear of the Lord. Because we can immediately think of terror. We can immediately think of awe. We can think of reverence or respect. I've had several opportunities as a middle school student to go and get professional baseball players' autographs. I was into baseball cards. I was following baseball, and you'd get in line and you'd pay money because they needed money, and you would buy items for them to sign a photo and a baseball, and you would walk up there. And I remember several instances. Whether it be a Mickey Mantle or a Willie Mays. The one I really remember is Tony Gwynn, because I thought he might have thought I had a mental problem. Because I handed him the ball and he asked me, "How are you doing?" And he started signing, and I didn't say anything because I didn't know what I should tell him. I was just kind of afraid. I just stood there fearful, apparently of a professional baseball player, one of the nicest guys. And he asked me another question. I don't remember what it was, but I didn't answer that one either. And I just stood there. I was like, why is he asking me questions? I just wanted his autograph. And I was just, my heart began to race, and he kind of handed me the stuff back. He's like, "Hey, have a great day." And I just kind of walked off. I was like, what was his problem? And I remember Willie Stargell was sitting there, and I was holding a baseball, and he is a massive man. And I don't mean overweight. I mean just massive, because I handed him my baseball, and all of a sudden he was signing a golf ball. He was holding this thing, trying to sign. I was like, what happened to my baseball? And he hands it back, and this paw comes down with the ball, and I just stood there in awe. I was like, what is his bat? Must have been a log or something. And I walked away just in awe. And every time I would go, I would get nervous and sometimes terrified of getting autographs from these guys. What was the deal about it? There was something there that our world had set them up. They had an ability and a skill that caused them to be above everyone else. And so I rightfully knew I wanted that ability and skill, and I didn't have it. And there was something about it that caused me intimidation, except for Jose Canseco. I kind of knew he was a mess even at that point. And I got it from him, and I walked on. But there was something there that caused me to pause. So there's the idea of the fear of the Lord begins to bring some of this in. You can really break it down into three things. Scripture talks about the dread and the terror that the very presence of God will cause in the people who come into his presence. It's also the idea of standing in awe in reference to kings. When we come into the presence of those who are rightfully above us, there's a sense of awe. There's a sense of dread. There's a sense of terror. But there's also a sense of revere or respect. Leviticus specifically talks about this in regards to parents. And this idea of fearing parents in a way that is revering and respecting them. And when we talk about the fear of the Lord, the only reason we want to spend so much time on figuring out that phrase is because it's the beginning of knowledge. It's the beginning of wisdom. If we miss that, we miss the book. And so when you take these different aspects of it, we got to be careful not to take the teeth out of the description. Because we might want to make this a little easier to digest. You're not really talking about like terror before God, are you? We sing praises. We enjoy his presence. He's our Abba, Daddy, Father. And we want to come in. Yes, we should respect him. But no, we want to understand what the fear of the Lord is. And it is a combination of dread and terror and awe and respect. And you don't want to take the teeth out of that. In chapter 8, of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Mr. Beaver, and if you haven't read it, and as I'm quoting someone named Mr. Beaver, you're like, who is this guy? But Mr. Beaver is trying to describe what Aslan is like. And Susan jumps in and she asks this, is he quite safe? She asks. And he replies, safe? Didn't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you. And then 4 chapters later, towards the end of the book, when the group finally meets Aslan, the creator of the universe of Narnia, the god of the book, the narrator tells us this, but as for Aslan himself, the beavers and the children didn't know what to do or say when they saw him. People who have not been in Narnia sometimes think that a thing cannot be good and terrible at the same time. And so what Lewis was trying to do within the book construct was trying to describe this very same thing about what it truly means to fear God. No, he's not safe, but he's good, and he's our king. And God is not safe, but he's good, and he's our king. And when you have a good king and a great God above you, it frees us to begin to look at the full aspects of what it truly means to fear the Lord and begin to enter into this. Because the fear of someone so far removed from our reality, similar to all those baseball players I was meeting, getting their autographs. But the fear of someone who's so far removed from our reality and our day-to-day experience is understandable. And when you think about the God of the universe, the perfect and righteous and holy one, when we think about coming into his presence, he lives in unapproachable light and manifests a glory and a very presence that we can't even dream of or imagine. We can't quite begin to comprehend. It naturally leads to awe. It naturally leads to wonder and respect and fear and terror, all rolled them up into one great response of humility. We bow our knee, we bow our heads, and we humble ourselves in the presence of God. That is what the fear of the Lord and the beginning of knowledge looks like. It looks like the ultimate response of humility. One commentator said this, a person who spends all his time looking down on others cannot see anyone or anything above him. The fear of the Lord is humility. It's taking a place of humility, not just before our Creator, but before all of mankind, understanding that we are but dust, and He is all glory. In Exodus 20:18, when God descends upon Mount Sinai, it says this, all the people perceived the thunder and the lightning flashes and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. Now you read that description of God descending on a mountain, the thunder and lightning flashes, the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. 2 weeks ago, we went to my 6-year-old's, I don't know what level of soccer they call it. It's where they just follow the ball around the field. It's very cute, and it's not really soccer, but we went to the game, and we could see clouds forming. It was very ominous looking. I'm like, well, it's Saturday afternoon. And we felt the thunder in the car before we ever got out. I was like, this is pretty serious. And then the rain started, and then lightning flashed, and it was pretty serious. And we were around that many moms and dads and 6-year-olds, and God reveals just a little hint of this, it becomes overwhelming. People started running for the metal cover because apparently that's what you do when lightning is coming. And so everyone's running under there, and lightning flashes. It just looked like it was right there in the field, and thunder began to hit, and the thunder shook. I thought it was going to tear the roof off, and there was an instant screaming. I couldn't tell if it was parents, children, who, but there was a terror that was taking over the place. It lasted about 10 minutes. They canceled all the games. We made it over to the wooden covered area. And that just one little glimpse, that one little thunderstorm that just kind of moved through this one little area, this one little portion of the world that caused this level of terror. And then think about God revealing himself in that. Not only that, but trumpet blasts and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, verse 18 of Exodus 20, they trembled and stood at a distance. It's kind of a no-duh kind of response. Then they said to Moses, speak to us yourself and we will listen, but let not God speak to us or we will die. They understood whose presence they were coming into. And Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, in order that the fear of him may remain with you, so that you may not sin." It's interesting because in Matthew 10:28, Jesus says not to fear man, and here's his reason. "Do not fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul." And he would separate the two, the fact that there is a fear that we need to have, and it's the one who controls all of our life. So the fear of the Lord, as we see it here, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. It's best expressed in this idea of a reverential submission to his will, a humility that causes us to humble ourselves in his presence, a lifestyle, a day-to-day, moment-by-moment lifestyle of submission and a desperate desire to see God glorified in our lives and in our world and ultimately in our dying. That is what the fear of the Lord, and that's the beginning point. And through the book of Proverbs, the fear of the Lord is expounded upon. Proverbs 8:13 says, "The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride and arrogance in the evil way, and the perverted mouth I hate, says the Lord." Proverbs 10:27 says, "It will prolong life." The fear of the Lord prolongs life, but the years of the wicked will be shortened. Proverbs 14:26 and 27 say, "In the fear of the Lord there is strong confidence." Notice, not the fear and trembling, but the strong confidence we have to skillfully approach this path of life that God has called us on, because he's at our side, and his children will have refuge. And then it says, "The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, that one may avoid the snares of death." Proverbs 16:6 tells us that the fear of the Lord prompts us to depart from evil. It leads us to a satisfying life and spares us from evil in Proverbs 19:23. And in Proverbs 22:4, it's the way to riches, honor, and life. The fear of the Lord, the fear of the Lord. But he gives us a contrast. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. It's simply a person characterized by moral folly. We're going to see this fellow pop up throughout Proverbs. It's characterized by moral folly. It's foolishness in the sense of one who hates wisdom and literally chooses to walk in folly or foolishness, despising wisdom, despising morality. They're not interested in wisdom, and they're unwilling to heed the counsel of others. In fact, Proverbs marks them out as unwilling to listen to the wise counsel of God himself and his people. And this lack of counsel leads to defeat and failure. That's listed out in Proverbs 11:14 and 15:22, showing that the path of the fool may cause a big smoke, but it ends fairly quickly. And the fool listens only to his own heart in Proverbs 12:15. So simply put, when you look at the fear of the Lord as the beginning of knowledge, and fools despise wisdom and instruction, the fool is characterized mostly by his or her unwillingness to listen to the advice of others, whether it's God or friends or their parents. And so that's how the fool is laid out for us. Now, this final thing I want to look at is wisdom itself, and that's what we'll close with. Look at chapter 3, verse 19. If wisdom is our theme, you'll see where it leads us. "The Lord by wisdom founded the earth, and by understanding he established the heavens." What Proverbs lays out for us is an ordered universe that the wisdom of God has created and set into motion. And so the Lord by wisdom founded the earth, and by understanding established the heavens. Now look over at chapter 8, because what chapter 8 is the personification of wisdom. And so we have wisdom speaking to us. Look at 8:22, and we'll read through 36. "The Lord," again, wisdom speaks, "the Lord possessed me at the beginning of his way, before his works of old. From everlasting I was established. From the beginning, from the earliest times of the earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains were settled, before the hills, I was brought forth. While he had not yet made the earth and the fields, nor the first dust of the world. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he inscribed a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when the springs of the deep became fixed, when he set for the sea its boundary, so that the water would not transgress his command, and when he marked out the foundations of the earth. Then I was beside him as a master workman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in the world, his earth, and having my delight in the sons of men. The response to that, now therefore, O sons, listen to me, for blessed are they who keep my ways. Heed instruction and be wise, and do not neglect it. Blessed is the man who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting at my doorposts. For he who finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. But he who sins against me injures himself. All those who hate me love death. Notice wisdom personified. Blessed is the man who listens to me, for he who finds me, verse 35, finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. But he who sins against me, in wisdom, injures himself, and all those who hate me love death. So Proverbs 8, describing this wisdom calling out, and the role of wisdom in creation is what we see here, and where wisdom was. So who is wisdom? Is it simply the personification for the sense of Hebrew poetry? And why should we listen to wisdom? Should we listen to the wisdom of Proverbs because clever and intelligent people have observed the way the world works and then expound that to us? That's part of the truth of Proverbs. But no, the fact is God built the world on the foundation of wisdom. Therefore, the wisdom from God is our point of access into understanding who God is and how to go on this journey that he calls us to. So what gives us the right morals in reference to this wisdom, and who speaks forth in this wisdom? Look over at Colossians 1, verse 13. And I'll fix my interference problems. Colossians 1:13. For he rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Christ is the wisdom of God. Turn to 1 Corinthians 1:18, and you'll see where this really begins to unfold. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18. The personification of wisdom that we can now look back on and see wisdom incarnate. Verse 18 of 1 Corinthians 1 says, "For the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the cleverness of the clever I will set aside. Where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world, through its wisdom, did not come to know God, God was well pleased through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For indeed, Jews ask for signs and Greeks search for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. To Jews a stumbling block, and to Gentiles foolishness. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God." So Christ indeed is the wisdom of God. And you keep going, and we end up right back where we started our whole message. Verse 25, "Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For consider your calling, brethren, that there were not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong. And the base things of the world and the despised God has chosen, the things that are not, so that he may nullify the things that are, so that no man may boast before God. But by his doing you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, and righteousness, and sanctification, and redemption, so that just as it is written, let him who boasts, boast in the Lord. Again, wisdom declares, blessed is the man who listens to me, for he who finds me finds life and obtains favor from God. But he who sins against me injures himself, and all those who hate me love death. So we're right back where we started. The fear of the Lord that produces humility, that produces respect, and that produces fear. Christ, the wisdom of God that leads to our own humbling there in 1 Corinthians. Jesus Christ is the supreme basis and expression of truth. When he came full of grace and full of truth. God has made the worlds on principle and realities that call us to live in accordance with the reality and the way God creates it. So the ultimate expression of that reality is seen in the person and work of Jesus Christ, the wisdom from God. And we see the extreme, supreme expression of this because Jesus Christ is the foundation of all the order we see in the universe. Colossians 1 tells us, by him all things were created for him, and in him all things hold together. The very wisdom of God, Jesus Christ, expressed through the creation. And it's fascinating to see, looking back on it, that the cross of Christ that's behind us, that we worship, that brings us into the presence of God, is morally consistent with the entire message of Proverbs. Wisdom cries forward to the cross of Christ and causes us to reflect on it. Tim Challies puts it this way: the gospel does not merely correct bad thinking in the past and present, which is how some people can interpret Proverbs. The gospel does not merely correct bad thinking in the past and present, but also prevents bad thinking in the future. So the gospel journey of Proverbs actually leads us on a path that causes us to make wise decisions and not leave the path. It actually causes us to make wise decisions in the future. So it prevents bad thinking in the future. He goes on, the gospel does not just speak to forgiveness of sins, but convicts me of the value of avoiding sin and reminds me that I now have the power to overcome it. The moral infusion that Proverbs requires for us to live righteously and to embrace justice and understand what equity is found in the wisdom of God, Jesus Christ himself. And as we reflect back on this, what we'll discover as we walk this journey together is that the gospel will wind its way in and out of every chapter of Proverbs. And as we walk this journey together, we talked about those themes that will orbit around us. The gospel addresses those. The only way we will control our speech, the only way this tongue will be used to bring glory to God is if God himself infuses within us a heart that's changed, a heart that will cause words of praise and words of building up and not tearing down to come forth from our mouth. So it's the gospel that's required for Proverbs to be anything other than some pithy little sayings, and the gospel that changes us from the inside out. If you're here tonight, you're looking desperately to make wise decisions. Your life is marked by these foolish turning off and seeking after your own desires, and you know it's led you to that point. At 19, I embraced that. At 19, I realized my life was a wreck. And God usually gets our attention that way through a girl, which is what he did for me. She was taken away. I was like, man, if I'm a mess at 19, what's it going to be like at 29? What's it going to be like at 39? What will it be like at 49, 59, 69? And at that point in my life, I decided, Lord, I've done it my way for 19 years, and I don't want to do it anymore. I want your way. And I surrendered my life to Christ. It was soon after that, I was challenged to read through the book of Proverbs. Read a proverb. If you read one chapter of Proverbs a day, you'll get through the whole book every month. And this wisdom cycle will continue on through life. Well, I misunderstood it. I thought you're supposed to read a proverb a day, like a verse. And so I remember I sat down and I read Proverbs 1. I was like, well, I know who wrote the book now. I'm excited for tomorrow when I find out what he says. But that's a challenge we kind of call forth is if you don't have that as a regular practice, begin to incorporate it now, not the verse, the entire chapter. Read the chapters through. And if you can keep going, keep going. It's wonderful to see how the gospel unfolds throughout all of these.